Welcome to Fluent English Journey. This is the place where we don't just learn how to speak English, we also learn how to live with more awareness, more peace, and more connection to ourselves and the world around us. I'm really happy that you're here. Today, we're going to talk about something quiet but powerful. I call this episode The Silent Battle. How to win the war within yourself. Because let's be honest, every one of us is fighting a battle that no one else can see. It's not a fight with other people. It's not about arguments, politics, or what's happening in the world. It's a much quieter kind of struggle, one that happens inside our own minds. It's that constant tension between who we are and who we think we should be. It's that inner friction between your dreams and your doubts, between your potential and your fear. It's what some people call mental noise. Others call it the inner critic. Let's slow down and really look at what that means. Your inner critic is that little voice in your head that always finds something wrong. It tells you about every mistake, every weakness, every reason why you might fail. It often shows up right when you're about to do something brave, like speaking in English, applying for a job, or trying something new. It whispers, "You're not ready," or "You're not good enough." And mental noise is that never-ending stream of thoughts, worries, and self-judgments that play in your mind all day long. It's like having a radio on in the background, a radio that you can't turn off. Sometimes the volume goes down, but then it suddenly gets loud again. Here's the truth. We all have that voice. We all experience that noise. But we rarely talk about it, especially at work or in public, where everyone expects us to look confident and calm. So, what do? We smile on the outside, but we struggle on the inside. That's why this topic is so important, not only for your personal growth, but also for your English learning. Because language is not only about grammar and vocabulary. Language is also about how you express your thoughts and emotions. The way you talk to yourself shapes the way you talk to others. So let me ask you something and take a moment to really think about it. Backhand index pointing right, what are you fighting for? Or maybe, what are you fighting against? Is it the fear of failure? The pressure to be perfect? The voice that says you're not ready, not smart enough, or not capable? Wherever you are in your life, whether you're a student, a parent, a professional, or an entrepreneur, you've probably felt that invisible weight. That feeling of trying to keep everything together while secretly wondering, am I doing enough? Am I being enough? Am I living enough? This silent battle is something almost everyone experiences. But each person experiences it differently. It's personal. It's private. It's unique. Now, here's the good news. You can learn to handle it. You can learn to understand it. And little by little, you can start to win that inner war, not by fighting harder, but by becoming wiser and more aware of what's happening inside your mind. In this episode, we'll explore how that happens. We'll look at where these internal struggles come from, how to notice them without being overwhelmed, and how to slowly change the way you talk to yourself. Because some of the most important conversations you will ever have are the ones you have with yourself. So wherever you are right now, walking in the park, sitting on a train, or relaxing with a cup of coffee, take a deep breath. Let's begin this quiet journey together. Let's go beneath the surface. Let's understand what's really happening inside your mind. This is not about fighting with yourself. It's about understanding yourself. It's about learning to find peace where there used to be pressure. You ready? Let's begin. Let's start by understanding the battlefield, your mind as the terrain. Welcome back to Fluent English Journey. In the last part of this episode, we started exploring something I called the silent battle, that quiet inner struggle that so many of us go through but rarely talk about. And in this next part, I want to take you a little deeper into that experience. Because before you can win any kind of battle, even a quiet, invisible one, you need to understand the terrain, the ground you're standing on. In this case, the ground is your mind. It's your inner world, the thoughts, emotions, and patterns that shape your daily experience. Let's call this your internal landscape. Your internal landscape is the mental and emotional world inside you that no one else can see, but it affects everything. It influences your choices, your reactions, your mood, your relationships, your energy, even your ability to learn and grow. Just like the earth has mountains, rivers, deserts, and valleys, your mind has its own terrain too. Some parts of it are calm and open, where confidence flows naturally and new ideas come easily. Other parts might feel heavy or stuck, like quicksand, where you sink into overthinking, self-doubt, or fear of judgment. And just like real landscapes, your mental landscape is shaped over time by your experiences, your upbringing, your environment, and your beliefs. These experiences create patterns, habits of thought and emotion that often run on autopilot. You might not even notice them. They become the background music of your mind, familiar, repetitive, and quietly powerful. So, think about this for a moment. When you face a challenge, what's your usual reaction? Do you immediately doubt yourself? Do you get angry or blame others? Do you shut down emotionally? Or do you rush into fix-it mode, trying to stay busy so you don't have to feel uncomfortable feelings underneath? These repeating reactions, these patterns, are clues. They show you how your inner world is structured. They reveal where your emotional weather tends to change. Now, I like the idea of emotional weather as a metaphor. Imagine that you wake up one day and it's raining inside your mind, heavy thoughts, dark moods, no motivation. Or maybe it's windy, your thoughts are spinning, your feelings are scattered, and nothing feels calm. Some days are foggy, your mind feels unclear, you can't make decisions, everything seems uncertain. And then there are sunny days, when you feel bright, focused, confident, and full of energy. Here's what's important to remember. Just like real weather, your emotional weather isn't permanent. It changes. It moves. It passes. But sometimes we forget that. We mistake the weather for the landscape. We feel sad or anxious and think, this is who I am. When really, it's just a storm passing through. Beneath that storm, your true self, your values, your strength, your capacity for joy is still there. It hasn't disappeared. It's just hidden for a while behind clouds. Now, some parts of the terrain are more permanent, the parts that have been shaped by old experiences. Over the years, when we go through things like rejection, criticism, or failure, our minds create what we could call fault lines. These are the weak spots, the sensitive areas where old pain still lives, just below the surface. And when something touches those areas, maybe a harsh comment, a reminder of the past, or even someone's tone of voice, it can trigger a much stronger reaction than the situation really deserves. That's when the inner battle feels the most intense. Not because the event is huge, but because it pressed on a part of you that still needs healing. Understanding these fault lines and the thought patterns around them is one of the most powerful things you can do. And this is where language comes in. Because the words you use to describe what's happening inside you become tools for awareness. So ask yourself, can you describe what happens in your mind when you feel discouraged? Can you put it into words? Do you know the thoughts that usually come up? Things like, I'm not good enough. Why do I even try? Or, everyone else seems to have it together except me. The more clearly you can name these thoughts, the more power you have to change them. Naming something gives you distance. It helps you see it instead of being trapped inside it. So here's a gentle challenge for you. Map your mental terrain. You can write it down in a notebook or just think it through quietly. Ask yourself, where do I feel most confident and free? What situations bring out the best in me? And where do I usually get stuck? What emotions or thoughts repeat again and again, especially when I'm stressed or afraid? And please don't judge yourself while doing this. You're not trying to fix anything right now. You're simply observing. You're learning the shape of your own mind. You're shining light into the corners so that they stop controlling you from the shadows. Because the truth is, we can't change what we don't understand. And most of the time, we're not choosing our thoughts, we're simply reacting to them. So here's one more question to sit with, maybe even pause and reflect. Backhand index pointing right, are you living in a mental landscape that supports you, or one that drains you? Do your thoughts give you energy, or do they steal it? Does your inner dialogue open doors or build walls? None of this is easy work. Looking inward never is. But this kind of awareness is where real growth begins. Once you understand your terrain, you can learn how to move through it with more peace, more clarity, and more strength. And that, my friend, is how you start to win the war within, not through force, but through understanding. But this is some of the most important work you'll ever do. Not just for your mental health, but for your relationships, your goals, and yes, even for your English learning. Because your ability to express yourself in another language is deeply connected to how freely you can think, how clearly you can feel, and how kindly you relate to yourself. So, as we move forward in this episode, I want to invite you to stay curious and to stay kind to yourself. This isn't about perfection. It's about awareness. It's about becoming conscious of the invisible systems that quietly run your life. And once you start to see those systems, once you become aware, something powerful happens. You begin to get your power back. The enemy within, limiting beliefs and inner saboteurs. So far, we've explored the idea that there's a silent battle happening inside all of us. We've started to understand the mental terrain, the inner landscape where that battle takes place. But now it's time to get really honest. Because if you truly want to win that inner war, you have to face a hard truth. Sometimes, the enemy isn't out there. It's in here, inside your own mind. It's not always your situation or your environment that's holding you back. Sometimes, it's your own thoughts, your own voice, your own beliefs. What are limiting beliefs? Let's talk about something called limiting beliefs. You've probably heard that phrase before, maybe in psychology, coaching, or self-development videos. But what does it actually mean? A limiting belief is simply a thought or an idea that you accept as true, even though it's not. It's a mental filter that quietly says, "You can't do that. Or, that's not for people like you. These beliefs aren't based on real evidence, but they feel real because they've been repeated so many times inside your mind that they start to sound like facts. Where do these beliefs come from? That's the interesting part. They don't just appear out of nowhere. They usually begin early in life, shaped by what you were told, how you were treated, what you saw around you, or what you misunderstood as a child. Maybe someone once said, "You're not very smart," or "You're just not creative." Or maybe no one said those exact words, but you felt it. You picked up the message in someone's tone, in a reaction, in an expectation. And even now, years later, after you've grown, achieved things, and changed, that old belief might still be whispering in the background. The inner critic. That whisper, that quiet voice that tells you you're not enough, has a name. It's called the inner critic. The inner critic is that judgmental voice in your head that always finds something wrong. It tells you that you're not ready, not capable, not doing enough. It compares you to others. It brings up old mistakes just to remind you of them. And the hardest part? It sounds like you. It uses your own voice, which makes it really hard to question. But here's a question worth asking, one that might stop you for a second. Whose voice is it really? Is it truly your voice? Or is it something you absorbed from a parent, a teacher, a boss, or even from society itself? Sometimes the thoughts that sound most like you are actually echoes of someone else's expectations. Imposter syndrome, the feeling of not belonging. Now, one of the most common forms of this inner enemy is something called imposter syndrome. If you're not familiar with that term, here's what it means. Imposter syndrome is the feeling that you're secretly not good enough, that sooner or later, people will discover that you don't really deserve your success. It's the belief that what you've achieved happened by luck, not by ability. It's the quiet fear that you've somehow fooled everyone. And it's incredibly common, especially among high achievers, professionals, students, or anyone who's stepping into something new. You might be doing everything right on the outside, passing your exams, speaking fluent English, performing well at work. But inside, you still feel like a fraud. And that fear of being found out can be exhausting. It keeps you in a constant state of self-doubt, always questioning your worth, your skills, and your right to belong. But here's what I want you to remember. Feeling like an imposter doesn't mean you're one. It means you're growing. It means you care. It means you're standing in a space that challenges you, and that's a sign of courage, not weakness. The enemy within, self-sabotage. Another way this inner enemy shows up is through self-sabotage. Self-sabotage happens when your own actions, or your lack of action, quietly get in the way of your goals. Maybe you procrastinate, even though you deeply care about the result. Maybe you avoid opportunities because you're afraid of being judged. Or maybe you talk yourself out of trying something new, not because it's impossible, but because a quiet voice inside whispers, "Why bother? You'll probably fail anyway." This is one of the most painful parts of the inner war, when you start to stand in your own way. And what makes it even harder is that all of this is invisible from the outside. People might look at you and see someone confident, capable, successful. But inside, you might be constantly second-guessing yourself. You might feel exhausted from overthinking, anxious before meetings even when you've prepared well, or worried about being found out. You're working hard, not just to succeed, but to hide the part of you that feels not enough. And this, by the way, is incredibly common in today's professional world. We live in a time when there's so much pressure to appear polished, productive, and permanently positive. We're expected to have everything under control all the time. And that kind of pressure creates the perfect environment for limiting beliefs to grow. Especially if you work or study in an international environment where you're speaking a second language, adapting to different cultures, and constantly being evaluated, it's easy for your inner critic to get loud. So, what can we do about it? Step 1. Awareness. The first step is always awareness. And awareness begins by asking some honest, sometimes uncomfortable questions. What beliefs are shaping my actions? Are they based on truth or on fear? Where did these beliefs come from? And do they still serve me today? Sometimes we're carrying around mental programs that are completely outdated, like old software running quietly in the background, slowing everything down. The good news is beliefs can be updated, but only if you notice them first. Step 2. Challenging the inner critic. Once you start to see those beliefs, you can begin to challenge your inner critic, not by fighting it, but by changing the way you talk to yourself. This doesn't mean becoming overly positive or pretending everything is great. It simply means practicing a little more self-compassion. For example, instead of saying, "I always mess things up," try, "I didn't get it right this time, but I'm learning." Instead of thinking, "I'm terrible at presentations," try, "I'm nervous, but I'm prepared, and every time I do this, I grow." These might seem like small shifts in language, but over time, small shifts in language create big shifts in mindset. The way you talk to yourself becomes the tone of your entire inner world. A reflection for you. Here's something you might want to reflect on today. Backhand index pointing right. What's one belief you've been carrying quietly, maybe for years, that could be holding you back? And if you could talk to that belief as if it were a person, what would you say to it now as the person you are today? Would you accept its words without question? Or would you finally gently push back? Because here's the truth. You are not your thoughts. You are not your limiting beliefs. You are the one hearing those thoughts. You are the one who decides what to do with them. And that right there is where your power lives. As we continue this journey in the next part, we'll explore how to become more aware of those thoughts without getting lost in them. But for now, just sit with this idea. The enemy within isn't really your enemy at all. It's a younger part of you, a version that tried to protect you from pain, fear, or rejection at a time when you didn't know how else to cope. Now, as an adult, as a learner, as someone growing into a fuller version of yourself, you get to respond differently. And that changes everything. Next, weapons of awareness. Noticing without judging. In the next part, we'll talk about awareness as your greatest weapon. How to notice your thoughts and emotions without judgment, and how to use mindfulness as a tool for inner peace and self-understanding. Weapons of awareness. Noticing without judging. So far, we've explored the inner battlefield, the invisible terrain shaped by our beliefs, habits, and emotions. We've met some of the enemies that live within us, limiting beliefs, self-sabotage, the inner critic. But now comes a turning point in our journey. Because if we want to stop reacting from fear and start responding from clarity, we need to develop one crucial skill: awareness. And let me be clear, When I say awareness, I don't just mean being aware of what's happening around you. I'm talking about a deeper kind of noticing. The kind of self-awareness that allows you to see your thoughts while you're thinking them. The ability to notice your emotions before they take control of your behavior. It's that quiet inner space where you recognize, this is that old pattern again. Instead of automatically falling into it. What mindfulness really is. This is where we step into the world of mindfulness, which, contrary to popular belief, isn't about sitting cross-legged on a mountain or trying to empty your mind. At its core, mindfulness simply means paying attention intentionally and without judgment. It's the practice of noticing what's happening inside you, your thoughts, your emotions, your physical sensations, without rushing to label them as good or bad, right or wrong. And this kind of noticing creates something rare in modern life: space. Space to breathe. Space to think. Space to choose a different response. It sounds simple, but it's incredibly powerful. Because most of us live in a constant loop of reaction. Something happens, we react. A message arrives, we respond instantly. A stressful thought appears, we believe it without question. There's rarely any pause. No reflection. Just reaction. But awareness introduces the pause. And in that pause, everything can change. Reaction versus reflection. When you pause, you move from reaction to reflection. It's a subtle shift, but it changes everything. Reaction is fast, automatic, emotional. Reflection is slower, thoughtful, intentional. Think of it like this. Backhand index pointing at reaction is a reflex. Backhand index pointing at reflection is a choice. One comes from the unconscious mind, the other from conscious awareness. And the more we practice pausing before we act, the stronger our awareness becomes. Tools for awareness. So how do we build this awareness in everyday life? There are two simple but powerful tools: journaling and stillness. 1. Journaling. Journaling helps you see what's going on inside your mind with clarity. You don't need to write perfectly. You're not writing for anyone else. Even 5 or 10 minutes a day can make a difference. When you write your thoughts down, you take them out of your head and put them somewhere you can look at them objectively. And sometimes, in that process, you realize, oh, I've been carrying that fear all week. Or, wait, that belief isn't even true. It just feels true when I don't question it. Seeing your inner dialogue written out helps you challenge it, reframe it, or simply let it go. 2. Stillness. The second tool is stillness, and in our fast-moving world, that can feel almost unnatural. We're so used to doing, producing, scrolling, consuming, that sitting quietly with our own thoughts can feel uncomfortable. But stillness isn't about inactivity. It's about presence. Even 1 minute of conscious breathing, just noticing your breath move in and out, can reset your nervous system and bring you back to the present moment. It's in this space of stillness that you begin to hear your thoughts more clearly. You start to separate what's actually happening from the story your mind is telling about what's happening. And that's when a new layer of awareness begins to unfold. Naming your emotions. Once you've created that space, you can start to do something very important. Name what you're feeling. It might sound simple, but it's one of the cornerstones of emotional intelligence. Saying, I feel bad, is a start, but it's too vague. What kind of bad? Are you frustrated? Disappointed? Overwhelmed? Lonely? Insecure? The more precise your emotional language, the more insight you gain. And as your emotional vocabulary grows, whether in English or your native language, your self-awareness deepens. Because you can't manage what you can't name. Awareness, then, is not about perfection or control. It's about learning to notice without judging. It's the gentle art of paying attention to your inner world with curiosity instead of criticism. And the more you practice it, the more space you create between stimulus and response, between what happens and how you choose to meet it. That space is where freedom lives. Rewriting your inner dialogue. In the last section, we talked about awareness, the ability to notice your thoughts without immediately reacting to them. That's the first and most essential step. But once you've learned to observe what's going on inside your mind, another question arises. What story are you telling yourself? And is that story helping you grow or quietly holding you back? Because whether you realize it or not, there's an ongoing conversation happening inside you all the time. Your inner dialogue. For most of us, that voice is so familiar, so constant, that we barely even notice it anymore. But it's always there, giving advice, making judgments, replaying memories, imagining outcomes. And here's the truth. How you speak to yourself matters. It shapes your confidence, your motivation, your emotional health, and even your ability to learn. If your inner dialogue is filled with criticism, doubt, or constant pressure, then everything in life becomes harder. You start to talk yourself out of opportunities. You magnify small mistakes. You punish yourself for not being perfect. Eventually, your mind stops feeling like a safe place to be, not because of the world outside, but because of the words you use inside. The mirror test. Let's pause for a moment and ask a simple question. If you spoke to a friend the way you speak to yourself, what would happen? Would they feel supported and understood? Or would they feel judged, pressured, and never enough? It's a powerful reflection, one many of us never take, because we've been taught to push ourselves, to aim high, to never settle. But somewhere along the way, healthy ambition can quietly turn into self-rejection. We become our own worst critics, and we do it in the name of improvement. The power of reframing. Now, this doesn't mean pretending everything is fine when it's not. Positive thinking isn't about denying reality. It's about choosing how you frame it. That's where the practice of reframing comes in. Reframing is the art of taking a thought, especially a negative or limiting one, and looking at it from a different angle. It doesn't change the facts, but it does change the meaning you give to them. And meaning, as we know, changes everything. For example, imagine you've just made a mistake in a presentation. Your first thought might be, I'm terrible at this. I always mess up. That's the old script, automatic, reactive, punishing. But with a little awareness, you can catch that thought and reframe it. Okay, I made a mistake, but I stayed calm. And now I know exactly what to improve next time. See the difference? One version shuts you down. The other lifts you up. One makes you afraid to try again. The other gives you courage to keep going. Becoming your own ally. Rewriting your inner dialogue isn't about forcing fake positivity. It's about becoming the kind of voice inside your own head that supports your growth instead of sabotaging it. You're not trying to be a motivational speaker to yourself, just a good friend, a wise coach, a compassionate guide. Someone who sees your flaws and your strengths and believes in your ability to learn from both. This is what we call narrative ownership. It means you may not always get to choose what happens to you, but you can choose how you interpret it. And once you take ownership of that inner story, you begin to rewrite it in a way that serves your values, your goals, and your well-being. Because every time you change the words you use with yourself, you change the world you live in. Resilience in action, how to keep showing up. Let's bring this back to English learning for a moment. Have you ever said something like, "I'm just not good at languages. I always forget words. My accent is too strong. People probably don't understand me." These might sound like harmless thoughts, but they're not just thoughts, they're scripts. Repeated lines that, over time, start shaping your confidence and limiting your progress. But what if you change the script? What if you said instead, "I'm still learning, but I've come a long way. I forget words sometimes, that's part of the process. My accent is part of who I am, and it doesn't make me less intelligent." Small shifts like these build something incredibly powerful over time, self-trust. And when you begin to trust yourself, even just a little more, you stop holding yourself back. You take more risks. You speak more freely. You make peace with the fact that progress isn't perfect and learning is never a straight line. So here's something to try this week. When you catch yourself thinking something harsh or critical, pause and ask, is this the voice I want to live with? Is this thought helping me become the person I'm trying to be? If not, try rewriting it gently, honestly, and with compassion. You don't have to force positivity, but you can offer yourself perspective. You can start to build a new internal script, one that recognizes your effort, your growth, and your humanity. Because the story you tell yourself isn't just a story. It becomes the lens through which you see the world. So choose your words, especially the internal ones, with the same care and kindness you'd offer to someone you love. Resilience in action. Let's keep moving. Because changing your thoughts is one thing, but resilience in action, showing up again and again, even when it's hard, that's where the real transformation begins. We've talked about the silent battles we fight within ourselves. The thoughts we carry, the stories we tell, the voices we listen to. But there comes a moment when mindset alone isn't enough. It's not just about thinking differently anymore. At some point, it becomes about acting differently. And that's what resilience really is. Now, resilience is a word we hear a lot these days in psychology, education, even in leadership talks. But let's look at what it truly means. Resilience isn't about being unaffected by challenges. It's not the absence of fear, pain, or failure. In fact, resilient people do feel all of those things. The difference is they keep showing up anyway. They fall down. They doubt themselves. They get discouraged. But they don't stay there. They keep going even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's unclear, even when they don't feel ready. Think about your own life. Maybe there was a time when you wanted to quit a course, a job, a dream, a relationship. Maybe the obstacles felt too big. Maybe you even did stop for a while. But something inside you brought you back. Can you remember what that was? Sometimes it's internal, a deep value, a sense of purpose, a belief that this matters. Other times it's external, the support of a friend, a mentor, or even just the memory of a moment when you were strong before. But wherever it comes from, that moment, the one where you whisper to yourself, "I'm not giving up yet," that's resilience in action. A small story. A few years ago, I decided to start recording content in English. I had ideas, passion, a real desire to help others, but also a lot of self-doubt. Every time I listened to my own voice, I cringed. I thought, who am I to do this? There were days when I was ready to delete everything, but something in me said, just keep going. Don't quit on a bad day. So I did. Sometimes with shaky confidence, sometimes with very little energy, but I showed up. And over time, it got easier. Not perfect, just easier. And that's the thing. You don't build resilience all at once. You build it choice by choice, one small act of showing up at a time. There's a phrase in English that captures this beautifully. Hang in there. It's what we say to someone who's struggling, someone who's facing something difficult. It means you don't have to be perfect. You just have to stay in the game. Hang in there, what it really means. Hang in there isn't a promise that everything will get better immediately. It's simply a way of saying, don't give up yet. Stay with it. You're stronger than you think. Another useful phrase is bounce back. Resilient people don't avoid falling, they just recover faster. They learn to bounce back from disappointment, rejection, and mistakes. That doesn't mean they're immune to pain. It means they've learned how to move through pain without letting it define them. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply show up. Even when you're tired. Even when you're not at your best. Even when you're scared. Showing up doesn't always mean doing something big. It can be as small as opening your notebook, practicing 5 minutes of English, having a difficult conversation, or simply not giving up today, and then doing it again tomorrow. The quiet reality of perseverance. Let's be honest, perseverance isn't glamorous. It's not shiny or exciting. Most of the time, it feels boring, frustrating, repetitive. Discipline doesn't always look like motivation. In fact, it usually shows up after motivation disappears. That's why emotional endurance, the ability to sit with discomfort and still act in alignment with your goals, is one of the most powerful skills you can develop. It's not easy, but it is learnable. The truth is, many of us were taught to chase results. Quick wins, fast feedback, instant success. But real growth is often slow, sometimes painfully slow. You take 2 steps forward and 1 step back. You doubt whether your effort is making any difference. You feel invisible. And still, you keep going. Because over time, those small, quiet acts of resilience add up to something solid, something lasting. They become part of who you are. A question for you. Can you think of a time when you didn't give up, even though it would have been easier to walk away? What helped you through it? What part of you said, I'm not finished yet? And how can you connect with that same part of yourself right now, today? What resilience really means. Because here's what I believe. Resilience isn't about being extraordinary. It's about being consistent. It's about learning to trust yourself. Not just when you feel strong, but especially when you feel vulnerable. It's about making a quiet decision again and again. To keep showing up even when no one is watching. So whatever you're going through right now, whether it's learning English, pursuing a dream, or just navigating life. Remember this. You don't have to be perfect to keep going. You just have to be present. You don't need to have all the answers. You just need to take the next step. Because in the end, resilience isn't something you have. It's something you practice. One choice, one action, one day at a time. The quiet victories, what progress really looks like. So far, we've explored the internal struggles that shape us, the beliefs we carry, the way we speak to ourselves, and the resilience it takes to keep showing up. But now it's time to slow down and look at progress differently. Because in a world that constantly rewards speed, visibility, and performance, we often forget something important. Not all growth is loud. Not all progress is obvious. And most success doesn't look the way we expected it to. Let's start by redefining what success even means. We often picture big, visible achievements. Landing a dream job, speaking English fluently in front of a crowd, publishing a book, reaching a financial goal. And yes, these moments matter. They're meaningful, but they're not the whole story. In fact, they're often the result of hundreds of smaller, quieter wins that no one ever sees. If we only measure progress by external results, we risk overlooking the powerful internal milestones that show we're actually moving forward. Because sometimes, real progress looks like this. Showing up when you don't feel like it. Choosing not to quit when you're discouraged. Trying again after a mistake. That's what growth really looks like. Steady, imperfect, human. The quiet victories, what progress really looks like. Sometimes progress means saying no to something that drains you, or saying yes to something that scares you. Sometimes it's simply being a little kinder to yourself than you were last week. These are victories, even if they don't earn applause, likes, or certificates. The problem is, we often don't recognize them. Why? Because we've been conditioned to associate growth with perfection. We think, if I'm still struggling, I must not be improving. But the truth is, struggle is often the clearest sign that growth is happening. You're pushing beyond what's comfortable. You're rewiring habits. You're unlearning patterns that have shaped you for years. And that kind of work, it's rarely neat. It's rarely fast. And it's almost never linear. The myth of the straight line. We often imagine progress as a straight, upward line, step by step, always forward. But real growth looks more like a messy graph. Progress, setback, progress, plateau, confusion, clarity, progress again. And that's completely normal. If you've ever thought, I thought I'd be further along by now, or why am I still struggling with this? You're not alone. That is the process. Progress isn't a straight road. It's a winding path full of hidden turns and quiet breakthroughs. Effort versus outcome. Here's another contrast we need to hold in mind. Effort versus outcome. We tend to focus only on the result. Did I pass the test? Did I speak perfectly? Did I get the promotion? But what about the effort? What about the part of you that tried, that practiced, that faced discomfort and didn't run away from it? That effort, especially when it's consistent, is one of the strongest signs of real progress. And it's the one we most often overlook. Quiet victories in language learning. Imagine someone learning English. Maybe they've been studying for years, but still hesitate when speaking. Maybe they make mistakes or feel nervous in conversations. What we don't see is that last year they were too afraid to even try. or that last month they wouldn't have asked that question, or that yesterday they might have given up. But today they stayed with it. Those are quiet victories, and they matter. No one else can define those victories for you. Only you know what it cost you to keep going. Only you know how heavy it felt to take that small step. So if you're waiting for someone else to validate your growth, you might be waiting forever. Instead, learn to notice it yourself. Learn to name your own wins, no matter how subtle. Say to yourself, "This was hard, and I did it anyway. I handled that situation better than I would have a year ago." These reflections build confidence, slowly but surely. And confidence doesn't come from being perfect. It comes from being honest. Honest about where you are, how far you've come, and what you still want to learn. Confidence grows every time you keep going when it would have been easier to stop. Every time you speak up, even with shaky grammar. Every time you say, "I'm still learning," and truly mean it. A small invitation. So, can you name a quiet victory from this past week? Something small, something no one else noticed, but you did. Maybe you stayed calm during a stressful conversation. Maybe you spoke English without translating in your head. Maybe you forgave yourself for a mistake instead of obsessing over it. Whatever it was, hold on to it. Celebrate it. Not because it's big, but because it's true. Because at the end of the day, the most meaningful kind of progress is often invisible to the outside world. It happens in your choices, in your mindset, in your emotional reactions, in your self-talk. And these things, though quiet, are the foundation of lasting change. So as we move forward, remember, progress doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it whispers. And it's up to you to listen. Next, we'll explore what it means to live from that place. To move through life in alignment with your values. To live with yourself, not against yourself. Integration, living with yourself, not against yourself. So, here we are at the end of this journey. Or maybe more accurately, at the beginning of a deeper one. We've explored the inner battle. The silent, invisible war that takes place inside our minds and hearts. We've looked at the patterns that keep us stuck, the voices we listen to, the stories we tell ourselves. We've talked about resilience, quiet victories, and the incredible power of self-awareness. But now we come to perhaps the most important question of all. What does it mean to live with yourself, not against yourself? At first, that might sound abstract. But think about it. How often do we feel like we're at war with our own minds? Fighting our thoughts, judging our feelings, criticizing our behavior, trying to silence the parts of ourselves we don't like. The insecurity, the fear, the jealousy, the anger. We try to push it all away, to control it, to bury it. But here's the hard truth. What we resist persists. The more we fight our inner world, the louder it becomes. So, what if we stopped fighting? Not in the sense of giving up, but in the sense of making peace. Choosing integration over suppression. Understanding over punishment. Befriending your shadow. There's a powerful idea in Jungian psychology called the shadow. It represents the parts of ourselves we tend to hide or deny. Our weaknesses, our shame, our impulses. But the shadow isn't bad. It's just unacknowledged. And the more we ignore it, the more it quietly controls us from behind the scenes. To befriend your shadow doesn't mean approving of everything you find there. It means being brave enough to look at it with honesty, and then choosing to respond with curiosity instead of cruelty. Or to put it another way, become your own ally. Stand beside yourself, not against yourself. This doesn't mean you stop holding yourself accountable. It means you stop doing it from a place of judgment and start doing it from a place of care. The power of compassion. Think about how you treat a close friend who's struggling. You don't yell at them or shame them, right? You listen. You understand. You remind them of their worth. What would change if you treated yourself the same way? That's what self-compassion really is. It's not self-pity or weakness. It's not letting yourself off the hook. In fact, compassion often takes more courage than criticism, because it asks you to stay present with your pain, to acknowledge your limits, without losing your sense of worth. It asks you to believe, even when it's hard, that you are still worthy of love, care, and respect, even when you're not at your best. And that belief changes everything. When you live as your own ally, you stop wasting energy on internal wars. You stop hiding parts of who you are. You stop chasing perfection and start honoring authenticity. And from that place, real transformation becomes possible. A gentle reflection. So let me ask you, what would change if you were truly on your own side? What would shift in the way you speak to yourself, in the choices you make, in the goals you set? If you knew that you had your own back, even on your worst days? Just imagine that for a moment. Imagine moving through life not as your own enemy, but as your own ally. It's not about never struggling. It's about struggling with dignity, with patience, with presence. It's not about pretending to be someone else. It's about accepting who you are and gently expanding into who you're becoming. Integration doesn't happen in a single moment. It's a practice, a way of living. It's in the small decisions. Choosing rest instead of burnout. Speaking kindly to yourself after a mistake. Listening to your intuition even when logic says otherwise. Noticing when an old pattern returns. And choosing, even briefly, not to follow it. The closing thought. So, as we close this journey, I want to leave you with this. You are not a problem to be solved. You are a person to be met, fully, honestly, and with compassion. And the more you meet yourself, the more you befriend the difficult parts, embrace the beautiful ones, and stand by yourself through it all, the freer, calmer, and more whole you become. Because living with yourself, not against yourself, isn't the end of the journey. It's the beginning of everything that truly matters. The quiet warrior closing reflections. And the more you accept the messy middle, the more whole, the more powerful, the more at peace you become. You've already begun the work. Just by listening, by reflecting, by being curious. You've taken a meaningful step toward living with yourself, not against yourself. And remember, in the silent battle, your greatest weapon is not control. It's connection. Connection with your mind, with your emotions, with your deeper self. That's how the war is won. So take a deep breath. You don't have to fight so hard. You're allowed to be human. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. As we bring this episode to a close, I want to return to where we began, with the idea of the silent battle. That quiet internal war so many of us fight every single day, even if no one else can see it. The truth is, being human means waking up each morning and facing some kind of inner challenge, a voice of doubt, a fear of failure, a past you haven't made peace with, or a future that feels uncertain. You don't need to be broken or dramatic to feel this. You just need to be alive. And if you're listening to this, you probably already know the battle I'm talking about. You've felt it. You've lived it. You may even be in the middle of it right now. If that's the case, I want to tell you something simple but true. You are not alone. This is something we all go through, in different ways, at different times. No matter where you're from, what language you speak, what job you do, or what your goals are, you are part of this shared human experience. But here's what's even more powerful. You are not just a survivor of that inner battle. You are a warrior in it. A quiet warrior. And being a quiet warrior doesn't mean pretending to be strong all the time, or pushing down your feelings, or never making mistakes. It means choosing to keep going even when it's hard. It means facing yourself with honesty, responding with compassion, and acting with intention. Not once, but over and over again. This isn't a one-time decision. It's lifelong work. And that's okay. Because real growth doesn't come from rushing. It comes from returning. Returning to your values, to your truth, to yourself. Especially when things get noisy or confusing. You'll have days when you feel like you've lost progress. You'll fall back into old patterns. You'll forget to be kind to yourself. That doesn't mean you've failed. It means you're human. The goal isn't to win every battle. It's to keep showing up, again and again. So, as you move forward, remember this. You're already fighting. Every time you resist the urge to give up, every time you rewrite a negative thought, every time you take a small action towards something better, you are already doing the work. The invitation now is to fight well, not with force, but with clarity, not with judgment, but with purpose, not against yourself, but with yourself. If you'd like to take this reflection one step further, try this simple journaling prompt in English. Find a quiet moment, grab a pen and a notebook, and write a letter. Not to your future self, not to your ideal self, but to the version of you right now. Begin with the words, "Dear quiet warrior," and let the words come. Speak honestly, gently, encouragingly. Write what you wish someone else would say to you. And say it to yourself instead. Because in the end, the way you speak to yourself is the battlefield. And maybe it's also the beginning of peace. If this episode resonated with you, if it gave you something to think about, to feel, or to reflect on, share it with a friend, a colleague, a fellow learner, or simply return to it when you need a reminder that you are not alone in this process. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are becoming. And that matters. If you'd like more thoughtful episodes like this, content that helps you grow both your English and your inner life, Make sure to follow Code Your English on your favorite podcast platform. And leave a review if you can. It really helps more learners find this kind of content. Until next time, take care of your mind, speak kindly to yourself, and remember, you are and always have been a quiet warrior.